So there are two kind of topics I'm going to talk through. The first is basically what UX is, and that UX is more than colors. There's a misconception that it's just kind of icons or font choices, and I'm trying to show a little more context around that. And the second is on the user research side, which is around asking why and not what. So, definition, user experience design, or UX, is creating digital experiences that meet people's needs. And I think one of the graphics that I find pretty evocative for communicating what UX is are just this set of screenshots, because these are all clear and understandable at this scale. You don't really need to know the details of what's going on here to be able to make some judgments about the flow between the screens. So I'm going to share kind of two examples here, and this is the counter example. To prove the point that user experience is more than icons and colors, this is some screenshots from a few years ago of lock icons of the Chinese mobile internet. So I don't speak or read Chinese, so many of these products are kind of beyond me. This is an image shared from Dan Grover, who'd worked there, and I think that from someone that comes from an organization that really works on supporting secure communication tools and things like end-to-end encryption, a lot of these lock icons don't really convey much meaning, because it gets into questions like, what's your threat model? And as a designer, I can make a lock that has two states, and one state is open, and on click, it goes to closed. If you'd like, it can even make a little sound. And that's not hooked up to anything. That is completely a cosmetic change. So instead of these kinds of only superficial color and font and logo choices, I want to get into some of the kind of deeper examples of behavior and how to communicate behavior to users. So the reason that I feel that this is a critically important topic is that I believe in the mission of many open source projects, but I am concerned that some of that good work is limited in impact because people often don't understand what's going on. So the user experience designers shape the understanding, people's understanding and influence behavior. But if the interface doesn't make it clear that how something works, people aren't going to use it. So I think that developer-first software can often be very kind of elegant from a behind-the-screen code point of view and may have a lot of features, but a lot of the kind of nuance and elegance of what those features can do is lost in that last kind of bit to communicate to end users how stuff is supposed to work. So this is an example that I consider kind of the opposite of the lock badge icons that aren't that meaningful. So this is from, these are screenshots from messaging apps. They're taken from an iPhone, and just at this scale, I can see that as an iPhone user, I get green speech bubbles or blue speech bubbles in the iOS native messaging client, depending on if my messaging partner is also using an iPhone. So that's just some information for me about kind of what's going on with the other person. But then red receipts, I think, are an example of how UX clarifies some complex functionality in a very, very simple way. So in the iOS messaging client, you get words, a couple of characters, read and a time, or delivered. WhatsApp, the messaging platform, has a convention that some groups opt to use check marks to issue read receipts. And that check mark is an example of a UX decision that I think is pretty effective. It works all around the world. I don't need to know if my messaging partner is on Android or iOS. I don't need to know if they're on Wi-Fi or the cellular network. I don't need to know if they're telecom or AT&T or Orange or any of these global service providers. It just works. But the thing that makes this interesting to me from a UX point of view is that it changes behavior. So an example of a functional description would be a different messaging app may say, we issue red receipts. But if the way that you get to a red receipt is you long press on the user's name, the sender's name, and then get to the message menu, and then you type in message ID, equals 053 because it's your 53rd exchange, and it returns status as 0 or status as 1. That is meeting maybe the functional requirements of issuing a red receipt, but it's not going to change behavior in the same way. So paying attention to the presentation of information. Another example, information architecture, what you put on menus. This is a very important way to help people navigate what is going on with your product, how to make it discoverable to other people. So one kind of quick way to get started is to look at the menu structure and put them on Post-its and look at it. And a common thing that happens, particularly in open source projects with distributed contributors, is your team structure shows up in the menus. And in some cases, that's totally fine. And in other cases, that might not be quite so helpful. So in one example, I'm not going to kind of name the team that worked on this because I don't want to point them out for the purpose of shaming them. It was just interesting that when I looked at this tool that was targeting people that wanted to shoot live video as a kind of a news source, they had two different kinds of parallel structures. One was templates, and the other was something like examples. And the templates team was different than the examples team. And that was sort of why they had this kind of parallel structure. But as a user, that's not really helpful to me. There was so much overlap between those kinds of things that I didn't really get how they were different. So one kind of really clear pragmatic thing that you can work on with a team is a style guide. This might be something that you use to codify what you already are doing, the choices you've already made, or it could be something that you would want to hire a designer to produce for you. And I think that the Tor project has recently put out their style guide. Ura Design worked on that. Simply Secure had played a part in it as well. And I think that's actually a pretty nice example of showing how a style guide isn't some kind of like top-down police decision-making about how everything must conform. It's actually a tool to encourage more contributors and more distributed contributions over time. Because you have a little bit of the rules of the road, you have agreement on exactly what the hex color for your different fonts is going to be. And that can be a way to help people do something consistent. So in the physical space at the top, colors are a bit washed out. But at the top, you see what is intended to be a Starbucks cup. They have an iconic green color that they've taken the care and attention to get that color all around the world. Different inks, different papers, different continents. They really made it clear that kind of color stands for something, and it's what they are. So I guess the one-side summary of this so far, UX is more than colors and icons. It's these details that shape understanding and influence behavior. So the next kind of chunk of this is around user research and asking why and not what. So it's never too early to get user feedback, even if you're at the idea stage. Different methods work for different phases of the process. So that's kind of thing one to keep in mind. And the second thing is, if you do user research and sit down with someone, they aren't going to tell you as a developer like what to do. They're not going to give you advice. They're going to talk about their own problems and tell you what they're trying to do. I recommend in-person observations with people using stuff wherever possible. This is me in the field kind of learning about how messaging works from people who are power messengers. And when you get the opportunity to actually sit side by side with people and look over their shoulder, it can be an extremely effective, extremely eye-opening way to get feedback. But Even if you aren't going to go talk to people outside your organization, my quick start tip number 1 is take what you have and print it. It's not that I don't like trees, it's that something kind of magical happens when you print things and pin them up on the wall. Similar to, over the course of my speaking career, I could proofread something so many times, a presentation, but somehow, once it's up on the screen behind me really large, it's much easier to find the typo all of a sudden. It's just kind of the way that things work sometimes. And when you print something out, you're able to decontextualize it a little bit, make it a little bit unfamiliar, and it'll give you a sense of fresh eyes that it may help you already start to answer some of your own questions. Like, wow, there's really a lot of stuff going on under this one menu, and like, why are we calling this? And how do these screens relate? And that's a UX activity that you can do with only a screen capture tool and a printer and start to look at the structure and see what you see. A second quick start tip is if you're unsure, you're stuck, you're not clear on how to move forward with the feature, what are good ways to do things? Take an example that's out there now, particularly a popular example. So I don't support the values of every kind of mass mainstream software product that's out there, but I can say that in general, things with very large user bases are usable. So if millions of people are able to use something, you can look at them as an example for how to present things in a way that a wide group of people, a global audience, can navigate. This is a screenshot from Jitsi, which is a video conferencing software, and this was part of an exercise to kind of get some comments around how to communicate values to end users. How do you explain the benefits of your product? And then finally, I would like to encourage you all to think not only about the product that you're building, but also the companion pieces that support how you talk about it. And this is pretty controversial to show at a venue like this that's so committed to open source. But I thought I would take the risk because it's late and hopefully everyone is a bit relaxed. So. This is an example from a website where we'd ask people to highlight parts of it that they found confusing. And one of the things that came through very consistently, this was in the context of people who used file sharing services and cloud-based storage. And in this case, there was a really big emphasis and a really big kind of open source love, pride, and leading with open source as a differentiator for why to use their product and not any of the competitors. And the audience, in this case, really didn't understand that. So I think that as a community, there's a lot of work to do on how to communicate what makes open source software special to a mass audience. And in this case, this claim, open source software, anyone can read the code and confirm that it doesn't have secret backdoors. Makes a ton of sense. This person actually understood that to mean something more like, I'm expected to check the code myself, even though I don't have the skills to do that. And the sense was that open source was too much like crowdsourced, and that it was just going to be like the whole community, the people that didn't really know what they were doing, were going to somehow contribute and build something. So that actually isn't really consistent with the message that they wanted to convey. So I'd like to give some positive praise to Least Authority, an open source distributed file system. And they have done a bunch of kind of work on the UX side, particularly in their GridSync product around kind of security education. And a lot of the way that they've done this is through this paper prototyping method and having an end user sit down and walk through a stack of pages, printed out screenshots while they think aloud. Yes, of course, it's real software, but sometimes it's nice to do it on paper. When you do it on paper, you can pull things side by side. It can be a much easier way to kind of talk about what the flow is. And many people who've been to school are quite comfortable if you give them a piece of paper and a pen to make some notes and some circles. And things that are on the screen can feel so formal and finished, especially to people that don't write code themselves. It can be a nice way to get some feedback. So this is a extremely quick and basic way to make like wireframes. So these are screenshots from the Twitter app on the mobile phone. And in this case, I'm actually holding a printout of the screenshots in a window that's backlit with a piece of plain white paper over it. And that makes it very easy and possible to trace over them so that you can start to see these kinds of things. So the magic that just happened here is these are printouts that I traced in the window, and the result is something like this, where I can now start to call out at the right level of abstractions, what are the menus named, what are the different things that you can click on, how is this structured? And this is the way that most UX designers learn how to do projects. Designers that don't work on a dedicated product team all the time, they're going to find something similar and print it out and do this kind of exercise in order to kind of get clear on what the structure is. And this slide was a bit out of order, but I'd also like to give some recognition to the Tails team. On the Simply Secure blog, my colleague Eileen Wagner recently wrote up an interview with their team that talks about some of the work that they've done on their UX UI sprints. It's an open source operating system for people with high security needs, and they kind of give some developer kind of perspectives on that. So those are the two kind of chunks of this talk. UX is more than colors, ask why not what. And to conclude, I'm just going to reiterate, user experience design details shape the experience. And if an interface has technical features and the UX is confusing, people won't use them. It's actually even potentially more dangerous than that, because open source contributors may enjoy the ability, knowing they have the ability and the power to check the code, but most people are making judgments on the quality of the engineering based on the quality of the UX, by most people meaning a kind of mass audience. So by way of conclusion, I would like to say that simplysecure.org, we have a knowledge base with a bunch of different topics. There are blog articles on a kind of a range of things in the UX plus security space, including more about how to get going in UX and in user research. As an educational NGO, we work for you, so we welcome your feedback on what to prioritize. If there's an article or a resource or a topic you were hoping would be addressed and it wasn't, please let us know. And with that, I will say thank you. These are different ways to reach out to us if you're interested in joining our public Slack channel. These are our Twitter handles and my real email address. So thank you very much.